uh, 4,500 years ago, before the very first stone of the Great Pyramid was, even laid.
Right, way before.
Yeah, way before. Engineers in Western India look out at this 10-meter wall of violent, destructive ocean water just rushing toward their coastline. And they decided to do the impossible.
They really did.
I mean,
Yeah.
they decided to trap it, and not just trap it, but actually harness it, tame it, and use it to build this massive maritime empire.
Which is just mind-boggling when you think about the era.
Exactly. Like, I want you listening to, just imagine standing on a coastline, right? Smelling that sharp mix of salt spray and like kiln-fired earth, and just watching an entire civilization synchronize its industry with the gravitational pull of the moon.
Yeah, it's a hell of an image.
It really is. So today we are immersing ourselves in the ancient tidal dock of Lothal, which is a crown jewel of the Indus Valley Civilization located in modern-day Gujarat.
And the source material we have on this is just phenomenal.
It is. So the mission for us today on this deep dive, and for you listening, is to completely dismantle all of our modern assumptions about ancient engineering.
Oh, absolutely. We need to tear those down.
Right, because we're going to unpack the sheer, mind-bending technical brilliance of a society that mastered hydraulic engineering, standardized mass production, and, global trade millennia before the Romans or the Greeks even entered the chat.
Yeah, it forces a complete recalibration of how we view technological progress, honestly, because, we suffer from this severe recency bias.
Oh, big time.
We just assume that any civilization predating the internal combustion engine must have been relying on these really crude brute force methods, like just piling up heavy rocks and hoping for the best.
Like the front stones or something. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But Lothal reveals a wildly different approach. The overarching philosophy here wasn't about dominating the landscape or, battling the elements.
Which is basically the hallmark of modern construction, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, look at how we build today. We pour millions of tons of concrete to fight rivers. We dynamite mountains just to run highways in a completely straight line.
Yeah, we just punch nature right in the face.
We do. But the Harappan engineers of Lothal recognize this really fundamental truth, which is, if you try to fight the ocean, you will eventually lose. Every time.
Nature is undefeated.
Always. So instead, they built an infrastructure that was designed to absorb, redirect, and move in absolute harmony with the extreme forces of nature.
That concept alone, like designing with nature rather than against it, is something we are only just now in the 21st century trying to relearn.
Yeah, and we're struggling with it, frankly.
We really are.
Yeah.
But to fully grasp the genius of this design, I feel like we need to understand the antagonist of the story first. Like, we need to talk about the Gulf of Khambhat.
Right, the environment they were dealing with.
Exactly. What kind of environmental monster were these ancient engineers actually facing? Because you hear 10-meter tide, and it sounds extreme, but I want to understand the physical reality of that much moving water.
Well, the Gulf of Khambhat is basically a massive geographical funnel. So because of the very specific shape of the coastline and the seabed topography there, when the tide comes in from the Arabian Sea, the water is squeezed.
Squeezed into a narrowing channel.
Exactly. It's squeezed into a rapidly narrowing channel, and this compression forces the water level to rise incredibly dramatically.
Like, how dramatically are we talking?
We are talking about a vertical shift of up to 10 meters. That's roughly 33 feet.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And this catastrophic surge of water happens twice every single day.
That is terrifying.
It is. I mean, think about the kinetic energy involved there. You have millions of tons of water rushing inland at high speeds, and it's carrying silt and debris with tremendous concussive force.
And then it just rips right back out a few hours later.
Exactly. It rips back out to sea, and that creates this massive vacuum that just pulls at the foundations of literally anything standing in its way.
So imagine standing on a beach and watching a 3-story building made entirely of water just materialize in front of you, crash into the shore, and then vanish.
It's a great way to picture it, yeah.
Right. If you were a merchant trying to park a heavy wooden ship in that environment, I mean, a simple wooden pier would be snapped into matchsticks in an afternoon.
Oh, easily. Even a massive vertical stone wall would eventually be undermined and pulled apart by the suction of that receding tide.
So what was the Harappan solution then? Like, how do you dock a ship in a giant blender?
Well, you don't try to stop the water, you create a pocket of stability within it.
Okay.
They excavated and constructed an enormous rectangular basin, and we're talking huge, measuring 220 meters in length by 37 meters in width.
Wow, 220 meters. So to put that scale into perspective for you listening, you could easily fit 2 modern soccer fields inside this structure end to end.
Yeah, it's colossal. And this wasn't a seawall, it was the world's earliest known enclosed tidal dock.
The first one ever.
As far as we know, yeah. And the basic mechanism is just brilliant in its simplicity. So, high tide rushes into the river system, the water level swells, and these large merchant vessels just ride that surge smoothly right into the artificial basin.
But the real magic happens when the tide recedes.
Right, exactly. Because instead of the water draining away and leaving those heavy ships to crash down into the muddy riverbed,
Which would obviously instantly shatter their wooden hulls.
right, completely destroy them. So instead of that, the basin retains a massive volume of water, keeping the ship safely afloat until the very next tidal surge.
But wait, hold on. Let's look at the physics of that for a second. If I build a giant rectangular swimming pool in the mud, and I trap millions of gallons of water inside it while the water outside recedes.
You're creating a massive bomb.
Exactly. A bomb. The water trapped inside the basin desperately wants to push outward. The, hydrostatic pressure?
Hydrostatic pressure, yeah.
The hydrostatic pressure pushing against the inside of those walls would be astronomical. So why didn't the walls just blow out into the riverbed?
And that, right there, is the exact engineering hurdle that ruins amateur hydraulic projects even today.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If they had built perfectly straight vertical walls, you are absolutely right. The outward hydrostatic pressure from that retained water, combined with the displacement weight of several heavy wooden ships floating in it, would have just sheared the walls right off their foundations.
The lateral force would just be too much for straight walls.
Way too much. The outward lateral force would simply be too great. So, to solve this, the Harappan engineers sloped the walls of the basin inward at a very highly specific angle.
So it's a redirection of force. It's like architectural judo.
That's a perfect analogy, actually, architectural judo.
Right. Instead of putting up a rigid vertical shield to block a punch, they took the kinetic energy of the water and used the slope to redirect it downward.
Exactly. By sloping the walls inward, they turned a fatal vulnerability into a structural advantage. It essentially operates on the exact same physical principles as an inverted arch.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So when the basin is full and the tide is out, the outward pressure of the water pushes against the inward-leaning brickwork. The slope forces that lateral pressure to travel diagonally down into the compacted earth and the bedrock beneath the foundation.
While the earth outside is pushing back.
Precisely. Simultaneously, you have the active earth pressure from the surrounding soil pushing back against the outside of the wall. So the inward slope perfectly balances these opposing forces.
Putting the whole thing under constant compression.
Exactly. It puts the brickwork under a state of constant compression. And materials like fired brick are incredibly strong under compression.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. They weren't just guessing. They were doing advanced load distribution calculations 4.5 millennia ago.
They really were.
But, physics can only get you so far if your actual building materials fail.
Oh, material science is everything here.
Right. Because if I use the genius inward slope design, but I build the wall out of, say, damp cardboard, the ocean is still going to win.
It's going to dissolve in 5 minutes.
Exactly. And standard ancient building materials, like those sun-baked mud bricks you see everywhere else, are essentially just dense cardboard when exposed to churning salt water.
Yeah, they would turn into a slurry in days.
So how did they solve the material science problem for a structure of this unprecedented scale?
Well, they had to completely reinvent their building blocks from the molecular level up. This macroengineering marvel is entirely dependent on their absolute mastery of microengineering.
The bricks themselves.
The bricks themselves, yeah. The sheer size and the geometric precision required for an inward-sloping hydraulic basin dictated a level of material uniformity that just didn't exist naturally.
So they couldn't just use whatever rocks were lying around?
Not at all. So they standardized the bricks. Every single brick used in the critical infrastructure of Lothal was manufactured to an exact ratio of 1 to 2 to 4.
The famous 1-to-4 ratio.
Yes. Specifically, they were 7 centimeters high, 14 centimeters wide, and 28 centimeters long.
When you look at the math of that, it's essentially the perfect ancient Lego brick.
It really is.
But why is that specific ratio so critical for holding back the ocean? Why not just make giant square blocks?
Modularity and interlocking strength.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Sure, if you build with irregular stones or massive, clumsy blocks, you inevitably end up with large, uneven gaps between them, right?
Yeah, naturally.
Well, in hydraulic engineering, a gap is a death sentence.
Because water always finds a way.
Exactly. Water, especially salt water under immense pressure, will find that gap, exploit it, wash away the mortar, and just completely hollow out the wall from the inside.
Wow.
But the 1-to-4 ratio allows for incredibly complex, tightly interlocking masonry bonds. An engineer could lay the bricks lengthwise, widthwise, or stack them vertically, and they would always mathematically align perfectly with the surrounding courses.
So there are almost no gaps.
Right. This standardization minimized the mortar joints to paper-thin margins, creating this nearly unified, impenetrable ceramic surface.
You use the word ceramic, and that is actually the key distinction here, isn't it? Because a perfectly shaped mud brick is still just mud.
Yeah, a beautifully shaped pile of dirt.
Right. If you drop it in a bucket of water, it melts. To survive the Gulf of Khambhat, these couldn't just be left out in the sun to dry. They had to be kiln-fired.
Yes. The transformation from clay to fired brick is a profound chemical alteration. Sun-baked bricks are just dehydrated dirt, like you said.
Right.
They retain their original chemical structure and will rehydrate.
They turn back to mud.
Exactly. Kiln firing, however, pushes the clay past a temperature threshold, usually around 900 to 1,000 degrees Celsius.
Which is incredibly hot.
Extremely hot. And at that temperature, the silica particles within the clay actually begin to melt and fuse together. It is a process called vitrification.
Vitrification, so it becomes like glass.
Exactly. The material stops being earth and becomes a dense, glass-like, water-resistant synthetic stone.
Just think about the staggering logistics of that for a second. We are talking about millions of bricks to build a basin 220 meters long and 37 meters wide, with walls several meters thick.
Millions upon millions.
To achieve vitrification, you need to build massive industrial kilns, right? These giant ovens of clay and earth that can trap extreme heat.
Yeah, the kilns themselves are engineering feats.
And then you have to source, transport, and continuously burn an absolute ocean of timber to keep those fires raging at 1,000 degrees Celsius day and night for weeks on end just to fire one batch of bricks.
The deforestation required must have been massive.
Right. The supply chain management required before a single brick is even lowered into the water is an entire civilization-level effort.
It is. It reveals a society capable of immense delayed gratification. I mean, they were expending unimaginable amounts of labor, fuel, and time to mass-produce an industrial-grade, highly specialized material, knowing the payoff was decades away.
They weren't looking for a quick fix.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the sophistication extended to the mortar holding those vitrified bricks together. Because you can't just use river mud to bind ceramic bricks in a tidal zone either.
Right, because the water would just wash the mud away and you'd be left with a pile of loose ceramic brick.
Exactly.
So to bind this structure, they used a carefully formulated lime mortar, which making lime mortar is a complex chemical cycle in itself.
Oh, it's wild chemistry.
Yeah. You have to take limestone, burn it at massive temperatures to drive off the carbon dioxide and create quicklime. Then slake it with water, which is a violent exothermic reaction, and mix it with the perfect ratio of sand.
Just casually doing advanced chemistry in 2500 BCE.
Right. And when that paste is applied and exposed to the air, it slowly reabsorbs carbon dioxide and essentially turns back into solid limestone, locking the bricks together permanently.
The chemistry is vital, yes. But so is the application.
What do you mean?
Well, modern construction is an industry totally obsessed with speed. We pour fast curing concrete, we build rapidly, we hit the deadline. The Harappan engineers utilized a radically different methodology, which was extreme patience.
Patience in building a dock.
Yeah. The archaeological evidence suggests they built the dock walls in highly deliberate stages, letting each individual layer of brick and mortar fully settle, cure, and compress under its own weight before adding the next course.
Okay, but why is that pause so important? If you have all the bricks and the mortar ready to go, why not just build the wall as fast as humanly possible to beat the incoming tide?
Because of the micromechanics of settling, when you build a massive heavy structure on top of a riverbank, the earth beneath it is going to compress. That's unavoidable.
Okay, sure.
So if you build a 30-foot wall in a week, The immense sudden weight will cause the foundation to settle unevenly, and the mortar hasn't fully chemically cured yet, meaning it is still slightly pliable.
So it shifts.
Right. This uneven settling creates microscopic shear fractures throughout the entire structure. Over time, that hydrostatic pressure we talked about will rip those microfractures wide open.
And the whole thing comes down.
Exactly. By letting each layer settle and the lime mortar fully recalcify before adding more weight, they ensured structural integrity at a molecular level. They were essentially sacrificing the speed of construction to guarantee the permanence of the structure.
They were building for their great-grandchildren, not for an end-of-year economic report.
That's beautifully put. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now we have a massive, inward-sloping, mathematically perfect, kiln-fired ceramic basin bound with chemically cured limestone.
It is structurally invincible.
Basically invincible, yeah. But wait, if you just trap millions of gallons of seawater in a giant basin and leave it there for months during the dry season, the water is going to become completely stagnant.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to turn into a toxic algae-filled swamp. A static bathtub is useless for a working maritime harbor. So how do they actively manage the water?
Well, you have to remember, a dock is a machine, and a machine requires moving parts.
Okay.
The Lothal Basin wasn't just a closed loop. It was integrated into the hydrology of the nearby Bogavo River, which ultimately fed into the Gulf. So they engineered a highly controlled intake and outfall system using massive sluice gates.
Sluice gates.
Yeah. Think of these as the control valves of the entire harbor ecosystem.
I want to visualize these sluice gates.
Yeah.
Because these are essentially massive wooden doors sliding vertically in stone tracks to block or release the water, right?
Basically, yes.
But wood swells when it gets wet, and stone is incredibly abrasive. If you have a giant waterlogged wooden door, the friction against a raw stone groove would make it impossible to lift.
It would be totally stuck.
Especially with tons of water pressure pushing against it.
Right.
So how did they operate a valve of that magnitude?
They engineered a metallurgical solution to a mechanical problem.
They used metal.
Yes. They reinforced the wooden gates with heavy copper fittings, and they lined the sliding mechanisms. So by introducing copper between the swelling wood and the abrasive stone, they drastically reduced the coefficient of friction.
And copper is okay in salt water.
Yeah, even in salt water, where copper naturally develops that protective patina of copper carbonate, that familiar greenish layer, it remains structurally sound and relatively smooth.
Oh, that makes sense.
So this allowed laborers, likely using an early system of levers or counterweights, to raise and lower these immense gates despite the crushing hydrostatic pressure.
So during the heavy summer monsoons, when the Bogavo River turns into a raging torrent of floodwater, the harbor masters could raise those copper-fitted gates and allow the excess water to flush right through the basin and out to sea.
Exactly.
This not only prevented the dock from overflowing and destroying the surrounding warehouses, but it also physically flushed out the stagnant water, the accumulated silt, and the refuse, keeping the basin deep and clean.
Yes, it was an ingenious self-cleaning mechanism powered by seasonal floods. But conversely, during the dry winter months, when the river slowed down to a trickle and the tides were less aggressive, they would drop the gates down tight.
To trap the water.
Right. This captured a massive reservoir of water inside the basin, ensuring that the merchant ships remained fully buoyant and operational regardless of how low the river outside had dropped.
But this brings up a logistical nightmare for me. To operate those gates effectively, you have to know exactly when the extreme water is coming.
You do.
Because if you open the gates too late during a tidal surge, the basin overflows and ruins the cargo. If you open them at the wrong time during the dry season, you drain the basin and your ships crash into the mud.
It's a very delicate balance.
In a world 4,500 years before satellite weather tracking, how did they possess the pinpoint predictive accuracy required to manage this system?
They looked up.
They looked up.
The solution to controlling the ocean was actually found in the sky. This is where we see the profound synthesis of different scientific disciplines in Harappan culture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Astronomy was not relegated to mysticism, astrology, or abstract philosophy. It was a hard, vital, applied science. The astronomers were literally the ultimate harbor masters.
Okay, walk me through how an ancient astronomer actually does this. Because they don't have telescopes. They don't have astrolabes.
No, nothing like that.
They are just sitting on the flat brick roofs of their observatories in the dark. What are they actually doing that translates into moving a massive wooden door in the water?
They were conducting rigorous, multi-generational data collection. Using naked eye observation, they tracked the precise movements and phases of the moon, recording its trajectory and illumination on clay tablets.
Okay, so tracking the moon.
And over decades of this painstaking record-keeping, a clear, undeniable pattern emerged. They realized the violent fluctuations of the 10-meter tides in the Gulf were inextricably locked to the lunar cycle.
That is incredible.
Yeah. They recognized the invisible hand of gravity long before the word even existed.
They mapped the correlation. They realized that when the moon was full, or when it was completely dark during a new moon, the Earth, the moon, and the sun were aligning, right?
Exactly.
And their combined gravitational pull was dragging the ocean into its most extreme high tides, what we call spring tides.
Yes. And when the moon was in its quarter phases, the gravitational pull was distributed, resulting in the lowest, calmest tides, which are the neap tides. And this astronomical data was fed directly to the engineers on the ground. It wasn't just theory.
It was actionable intelligence.
Absolutely. If the clay tablets indicated a full moon was approaching in 3 days, the harbor masters knew the massive spring tides were imminent. So they could proactively adjust the copper-fitted sluice gates to prepare for the massive influx of kinetic energy.
They used the predictable clockwork of the cosmos to tame the chaotic unpredictability of the ocean.
It is an awe-inspiring integration of celestial observation and hydraulic engineering.
It really is the ultimate testament to the human mind. They connected a glowing rock in the night sky to the safety of a wooden ship floating in a brick bathtub.
Put simply, yes.
And all of this staggering infrastructure, the millions of vitrified bricks, the complex line chemistry, the inward-sloping load distribution, the copper-fitted valves, the lunar observatories, it all existed for one singular driving purpose, didn't it?
Trade.
Exactly. It was all built to bring the ships in. So let's pivot to the vessels themselves, because if you are navigating a 10-meter tidal bore, you aren't doing it in a flimsy canoe. What did Harappan maritime technology look like?
Well, the ships were engineered as specialized tools, perfectly adapted to their unique environment. First and foremost was the selection of materials. The primary timbers used were native Indian hardwoods, specifically teak and rosewood.
Teak and rosewood. But those are not standard building woods, right? They're incredibly dense, heavy, and extremely difficult to cut and shape.
Very difficult.
Why go through the agony of shaping such incredibly hardwood with ancient hand tools? Why not use something softer and easier to work with like pine?
Because of the biochemical properties of the wood itself, teak is saturated with natural oils and resins.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When you expose standard wood to the brutal combination of blazing tropical sun, highly corrosive salt water, and marine organisms like shipworms, it rots and disintegrates very quickly.
It just falls apart.
But the natural resins in teak act as an organic waterproofing and antifungal agent. A teak hull can withstand decades of punishing maritime use without rotting.
It's brilliant.
And they held these massive timbers together, not just with wooden pegs, but with copper nails.
Think about the massive supply chain required just to manufacture a copper nail back then.
It's extensive.
You have to mine the ore from the earth, transport it, smelt it at extreme temperatures to extract the liquid copper, and then blacksmiths have to individually hammer out thousands of heavy nails.
Thousands of them, yes.
And they are using this precious metal just to hold the planks of a ship together. That speaks volumes about the value of the cargo those ships were carrying.
It really does.
But beyond the materials, the actual architectural shape of the hull is fascinating to me, because they didn't use the deep V-shaped hulls we typically associate with ocean-going galleons. They built their ships with flat bottoms.
The flat bottom is a masterclass in hydrodynamic compromise.
How so?
A deep V-shaped hull is excellent for slicing through deep, choppy ocean waves because it acts like a knife, providing immense stability.
Right.
But a deep hull requires deep water. If a ship with a deep V-hull tried to navigate the Bogavo River during the dry season or maneuver into the Lothal Basin during a neap tide, its keel would instantly bury itself in the silt, grounding the vessel permanently.
Yeah, get stuck in the mud.
Exactly. The flat bottom provided a very shallow draft. It allowed these massive, heavy cargo ships to skim over the shallow sandbars of the river system and slide effortlessly into the brick basin, perfectly complementing the hydraulic infrastructure they had built.
It's a cohesive system. The dock dictates the ship, and the ship dictates the dock.
They were designed for each other.
And their propulsion was wonderfully elemental. A single heavy mast carrying a broad, square sail made of tightly woven cotton. But a square sail can't tack against the wind very
Yeah.
effectively.
No, it's terrible for that.
If the wind is blowing at your face, a square sail is useless. So how did they navigate across the vast, open ocean to reach places like Mesopotamia or Africa?
They didn't fight the wind, just like they didn't fight the tide. They surrendered to the thermal mechanics of the planet. They relied entirely on the monsoon winds.
The monsoons.
Yeah. The monsoon is a massive seasonal meteorological phenomenon driven by the temperature differential between the Asian landmass and the Indian Ocean.
Okay.
During the summer, the land heats up massively, the hot air rises, and it pulls in moist, powerful winds from the southwest over the ocean. This brings the torrential rains and violent churning seas.
So trying to sail west toward Africa during the summer would be a total suicide mission. You'd be rowing a flat-bottomed wooden boat directly into a hurricane-force headwind.
Exactly. You'd never make it. So they simply waited. They let the planet do the work.
Wow.
In the winter months, the thermal dynamic flips entirely. The Asian landmass cools down, and the high-pressure system pushes cold, dry air out from the northeast, sweeping across the Indian Ocean toward Africa.
The winds reverse.
The winds reverse. The Harappan merchants synchronized their entire economic calendar with this invisible atmospheric engine. They loaded their ships in Lothal, hoisted their square cotton sails, and let the northeast monsoon carry them smoothly across the Arabian Sea. They literally rode the breath of the earth.
It perfectly mirrors their approach to the tides. Don't fight the force, ride the force.
Yes, that is the defining ethos.
And by riding the monsoons, Lothal elevated itself from a regional fishing village into an absolute powerhouse of global commerce. I mean, 4.5 millennia ago, they were managing a multi-continental supply chain.
It's staggering to think about.
We are talking about deep, established maritime routes, linking the Indus Valley directly to the sprawling cities of Mesopotamia, the humid ports of the Persian Gulf, and all the way to the rugged coastlines of eastern Africa.
And when you operate a global supply chain of that magnitude, the logistics of storage become just as critical as the logistics of transportation.
You have to put the stuff somewhere.
Exactly. The Harappans constructed an elaborate complex of warehouses directly adjacent to the dock. These structures were built with the same meticulous attention to detail as the basin itself.
Okay, how so?
They utilized the same vitrified, kiln-fired bricks to ensure absolute protection from the elements, but the architectural design was heavily focused on passive thermodynamics.
The source material notes these warehouses featured incredibly high ceilings and very narrow windows. It's essentially ancient air conditioning, isn't it?
Precisely. In the brutal heat of the Gujarat summer, a sealed brick box would become an oven, completely spoiling organic trade goods.
It would ruin everything.
Right. So by building high ceilings, they allowed the immense radiant heat to rise and pool well above the stored cargo.
And the windows?
The narrow windows, which were carefully placed, allowed a steady cross breeze of cooler air to circulate constantly at ground level while physically preventing the blinding direct sunlight and the driving horizontal rains of the monsoon from entering the structure.
It was an ingeniously simple Euro-energy climate control system.
It was.
And the goods they were protecting inside these naturally cooled vaults were the luxury items driving the ancient global economy.
Let's talk about the inventory.
Yeah, let's look at the inventory. The most striking items are the micro-drilled carnelian beads.
Ah, those are incredible.
Carnelian is a stunning semi-precious stone with this deep, fiery red translucence. But it is incredibly hard. And yet, the Harappans were manufacturing tens of thousands of these tiny beads with holes drilled precisely through the center.
It's baffling.
How is a human being in 2500 BCE drilling a microscopic hole through solid stone without a Dremel tool or a laser?
It is an astonishing feat of ancient tribology, which is the science of friction and wear.
Okay.
They weren't just poking holes, they were executing high-precision machining. They utilized a tool called a bow drill. Imagine a small, sturdy stick with a specialized drill bit attached to the end. The operator wraps the string of a small, arched bow around the stick.
Oh, like starting a fire.
Exactly like that. By rapidly sawing the bow back and forth, the string spins the stick at incredibly high speeds.
But even a rapidly spinning copper bit isn't hard enough to cut through carnelian, right?
Yeah.
Copper is too soft, it would just dull itself against the stone.
And this is where their understanding of material science shines again.
Yeah.
They didn't rely on the drill bit alone to cut the stone. They used an abrasive slurry.
A slurry?
Yeah. They would crush up extremely hard minerals like quartz or emery, mix it with water, and constantly feed this abrasive paste into the tiny hole as the drill spun.
Oh, wow.
So the spinning bit caught the microscopic, jagged shards of quartz and essentially sanded its way through the carnelian micron by agonizing micron.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It would take a skilled artisan hours of unbroken, physically exhausting, repetitive labor just to pierce a single bead.
The physical toll on the hands of those artisans must have been immense, and yet they mass-produced these beads with such flawless uniformity that they became the ultimate status symbol for the elites in faraway Mesopotamia.
They were in incredibly high demand.
Alongside the delicate luxury goods, the warehouses were stacked with heavy industry too. Massive, heavy copper ingots cast into standardized shapes, their surfaces coated in the greenish patina of oxidation.
The foundational material of the Bronze Age.
Ready to be melted down into weapons, armor, tools, and agricultural implements.
And grounding all of this wealth was the agricultural surplus of the Indus Valley itself. They exported vast quantities of organic goods, stored securely in massive clay jars sealed with airtight clay stoppers.
Like what kind of organic goods?
Well, these jars were often filled with deeply concentrated golden sesame oil, which was a highly prized commodity in the arid regions of the Middle East. It was used for cooking, medicine, and lighting.
The concentration of sheer economic power sitting inside those high-ceilinged brick warehouses was just staggering.
It was essentially the Wall Street of the ancient world.
So we have explored the macroeconomics. We understand the global trade routes stretching to Africa, the brilliant hydraulic redirection of the inward-sloping walls, the chemistry of the kiln-fired bricks, and the celestial mechanics of the lunar astronomers.
A massive interlocking system of genius.
But I want to zoom in tight. I want to look at the human reality. Who is actually physically moving these massive copper ingots? Who is carrying the crates of carnelian? What was it like to wake up and go to work at the world's most advanced ancient harbor?
When we think about massive ancient construction projects or bustling ancient ports, our minds have been poisoned by Hollywood, really. The cinematic depiction of ancient labor is always one of chaotic, violent desperation. We imagine a blazing, tyrannical sun, thousands of emaciated workers screaming in panic, overseers cracking heavy whips, everything frantic and disorganized.
Like the classic movie scenes of Egypt.
Exactly. But the archaeological reality of a place like Lothal suggests a society operating on entirely different, deeply organized principles.
It makes sense that a society capable of meticulously letting every layer of mortar cure at the molecular level wouldn't be running around screaming.
Right, they weren't frantic.
Their workday was dictated by the same natural forces that govern their engineering. They didn't fight the environment. They synchronized with it. For example, the laborers primarily worked in the very early morning hours, just before dawn, and then again in the late evening as the sun was setting.
Which is a purely logical adaptation to the thermodynamics of the region. The midday sun in western India is oppressive. It is physically dangerous to perform heavy cardiovascular labor during those hours.
It's just too hot.
By shifting the work to the margins of the day, they protected their workforce. The physical experience of the work would have been deeply sensory. The workers operated barefoot.
Barefoot on bricks.
Yes. Imagine the tactile sensation of walking barefoot across millions of kiln-fired ceramic bricks. In the early morning, the bricks would hold the deep, cooling chill of the night. By the evening shift, they would be radiating the stored, golden warmth of the afternoon sun.
Imagine a team of laborers, their shoulders bearing the weight of a heavy wooden crate, packed tight with thousands of those micro-drilled carnelian beads. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, salt water, and the pungent aroma of sesame oil leaking slightly from a nearby jar.
It's a very vivid picture.
There are no diesel engines screaming, no hydraulic cranes whining. The loudest sounds are the rhythmic, muted padding of bare feet on smooth brick, the slow, heavy grinding of the copper-fitted sluice gates being raised, and the massive, deep breath of the wind catching the square cotton sail of an arriving merchant ship.
It was an existence defined by a steady, predictable, rhythmic momentum. It was hard, physical labor, without a doubt, but it lacked the frantic, artificial urgency of modern industry.
That's a huge difference.
It really is. Our modern shipping ports are governed by the artificial construct of the clock, by the desperation of arbitrary deadlines and stock market valuations.
Rush, rush, rush.
Always. But at Lothal, the pace of human life was inextricably linked to the immutable laws of nature. The workday began and ended with the rotation of the earth. The ships arrived and departed with a thermal shifting of the monsoon winds. The massive gates were operated by the gravitational pull of the moon.
It was a civilization moving in absolute lockstep with the mechanics of the cosmos.
Beautifully said.
It sounds incredibly profound, a whole society operating like a perfectly tuned instrument. But, no instrument plays forever.
No, they don't.
The laborers followed the cycle of the day, the ships followed the cycle of the wind, the tides followed the cycle of the moon. And inevitably, the Harappan civilization itself had to complete its own cycle. The story of Lothal eventually comes to an end.
It does.
How did a city so perfectly adapted to its environment eventually fall?
We often expect the fall of ancient cities to be cinematic, just like we expect their building to be. We look for evidence of a massive, cataclysmic event.
Like an invading army burning the warehouses to the ground.
Or a sudden, violent earthquake, or a catastrophic volcanic eruption. But the archaeological record at Lothal tells a much quieter and perhaps much more tragic story.
What happened?
The harbor was not defeated by human violence or sudden disaster. It was slowly suffocated by a river.
It was the Bogavo River, right? The very artery that fed the harbor and connected it to the sea.
Yes.
The hydrology of the region began to change. Over decades, perhaps centuries, the flow of the river began to carry slightly more sediment.
Just a little more silt.
Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the heavy silt began to accumulate on the riverbed. As the silt built up, the water grew shallower, and the flow of the river began to alter its course, slowly meandering away from the intricate hydraulic intake system the Harappans had built.
Try to imagine the psychological toll that slow-motion collapse would take on the people living there.
It must have been agonizing.
Imagine being a harbor master, descended from a long, proud lineage of astronomers and engineers. You possess the same genius, the same mathematical understanding of the slopes and the tides.
But year after year, you stand on the edge of the inward-sloping wall, and you watch the waterline drop just a fraction of an inch lower.
We're watching it slip away.
The massive, flat-bottomed teat ships start scraping the mud as they enter. The crucial high tides, the ones needed to flush the system, arrive with less and less force.
It wasn't a sudden death. It was a slow strangulation. And they didn't just abandon their masterpiece immediately. They tried to fight back.
What did they do?
They tried to adapt. They reinforced the vital brickwork. They constantly repaired the massive sluice gates. And most heartbreakingly, they dredged.
Oh, man.
You can visualize the laborers wading into the receding, muddy water, dragging heavy baskets, desperately trying to manually scoop out the accumulating silt from the basin floor to keep it deep enough for the ships.
The slow, exhausted scraping of tools against the ceramic bricks at the bottom of the dock. It is the agonizing sound of human effort battling against geological inevitability.
But eventually they had to accept the ultimate tenet of their own philosophy, which is that nature always wins.
You can't outdredge a dying river.
No, you can't. They had built an empire by working in harmony with the environment, but when the environment fundamentally changed its shape, the infrastructure could no longer function. The river moved on, the basin filled with mud, the global trade network collapsed.
And the harbor masters and the laborers slowly dispersed, abandoning the colossal brick structure to the encroaching earth.
And for over 4,000 years, the greatest hydraulic achievement of the ancient world lay completely silent, buried beneath meters of shifting dirt.
It just vanished from human memory. Which brings us out of the deep past and into the blinding light of the 1950s, the moment of rediscovery.
Yes. Place yourself in the shoes of the lead archaeologist on that excavation site in Gujarat. You are working in the punishing, dry heat. The air is thick with dust.
Standard dig.
Right. For weeks, your team has been carefully, methodically brushing away massive deposits of hard-packed river silt. You think you are excavating a standard ancient settlement.
And then a trowel scrapes against something unnaturally perfectly straight. You brush away the dirt, and you reveal the deep red of a kiln-fired ceramic brick.
Then another perfectly interlocking brick.
And another. As the excavation widens, the sheer impossible scale of the structure begins to reveal itself. It's not a house. It's not a temple. As the shape of the massive 220-meter inward-sloping basin emerges from the earth, a shockwave of realization must have rippled through the archaeological community.
Oh, it was totally paradigm shifting, because it shattered every preconceived timeline of human engineering. They had uncovered a 4.5 millennia-old tidal dock.
Which shouldn't have existed.
Not according to the textbooks, no. But what is truly staggering is the condition of the site. Despite being buried under crushing tons of earth for 4,000 years, despite the constant exposure to corrosive subterranean salt and moisture, the fundamental infrastructure was largely intact.
That is just insane.
The vitrified 1-to-4 ratio bricks hadn't dissolved. The inward sloping walls hadn't collapsed inward under the weight of the earth because the physics of the design were flawless.
The meticulous patience of those ancient laborers, taking the time to let every single layer of lime mortar chemically cure and settle before adding the next, had actually worked.
It worked perfectly.
They built a structure so structurally sound that it survived the death of their civilization and a 4,000-year burial. Standing in that excavated basin, running your hand along those smooth red bricks, must feel like reaching across the abyss of time and shaking hands with a genius.
It is a profoundly humbling experience for modern engineers. It forces us to recognize that intelligence, innovation, and an incredibly deep understanding of physics and chemistry existed long before the scientific revolution.
Long before.
We are looking at a society that understood the mechanics of the natural world with a clarity that we often lack today.
So as we pull back and look at the entirety of this deep dive, let's synthesize exactly what we have uncovered today. We have explored an ancient marvel that forces us to rewrite the history books.
Completely.
We unpack the macro-engineering of a massive hydraulic basin designed with inward-sloping walls to perfectly balance the crushing hydrostatic pressure of a 10-meter ocean tide. We dug into the micro-engineering of perfectly standardized, kiln-fired ceramic bricks bound by chemically complex lime mortar.
The material science alone is staggering.
Right. We saw how ancient astronomers mapped the gravitational pull of the moon to operate massive copper-fitted sluice gates. We visualized flat-bottomed, teak-hulled ships riding the thermal engines of the monsoon winds to establish a global trade network stretching to Africa, trading in everything from micro-drilled carnelian beads to heavy bronze.
Yet despite all of that staggering technical and mathematical brilliance, the ultimate legacy of Lothal, the core lesson that survives the 4 millennia of silence, is deeply philosophical.
What would you say that is?
The Harappan civilization achieved greatness because it fundamentally rejected the idea that humanity must conquer nature. They didn't build rigid, vertical walls in a futile attempt to fight the catastrophic kinetic energy of a 10-meter tide.
They built an intelligent, sloped basin designed to gracefully absorb and redirect that energy.
Exactly. They didn't row massive ships against hostile headwinds. They waited with profound patience for the earth to exhale a monsoon, and they rode the wind. They built an entire society based on the principle of harmony and synchronization with the natural world.
They learned to move with the rhythm of the planet. Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave with you, the listener. As you step out of this ancient world and back into the reality of the 21st century, take a moment to really look at our modern infrastructure.
It's quite a contrast.
Look at the massive, rigid, concrete seawalls we frantically pour to hold back the inevitably rising oceans. Look at our sprawling cities, built on the premise of dominating the landscape, driven by artificial clocks, fueled by a constant, exhausting battle against the weather and the environment.
A battle we are, frankly, losing.
Exactly. If 4,500 years from now, a team of future archaeologists digs through the silt and uncovers the ruins of our coastal cities, what will our building materials say about our relationship with nature?
That's a great question.
Will the archaeological records show that we eventually possessed the wisdom to stop fighting and learn to move with the tide? Or will they find the shattered remnants of a civilization that exhausted itself and its planet in a futile, arrogant attempt to hold back the sea?